This week on the Working Audio Tools podcast, we are going to be discussing the importance of being aware of harmonic distortion in monitoring, because this can have multiple impacts on our mixers and masters, and Paul is going to take it away. Before we get into today's episode of the Working Audio Tools podcast, I'd like to pull your attention to the link in the description of the video and the show notes. That is a link to Nicholas De Lorenzo's Panorama Mixing and Mastering mailing list, which is full of incredible information regarding mixing and mastering. If you follow Nick's channel, he has an incredibly mathematical and logical way of approaching mixers and his business, and the mail out that goes out every week or a couple of times a week is full of quality information that will help you with your mixing and mastering and your business. On with today's episode.
Yes, now there are different forms of distortion in audio. Some of them are good, and it gets debated a lot, and everybody's wanting to add what we call colour to things, which is relatively known as harmonic distortion. We're not going to really get into all the forms of distortion because obviously there is a harmonic distortion and there's also intermodulation distortion. Intermodulation distortion, very quickly, is something that isn't musical whatsoever. It's actually the worst form of distortion you can get. But there actually are things like Fairchilds that have a very, very high IMD, and it has a sound. And it, for me, it kind of intermodulation distortion kind of hazes everything, and you lose a lot of clarity in there. But we're not talking about bad distortion. We're going to talk about good distortion, and we're not talking guitar amps. We're talking about distortion, harmonic distortion, and the things about it that you can use to your advantage, but also the things that you need to be aware of. Now, we'll discuss monitoring first, because when it comes to monitoring, i.e. headphones and speakers, all distortion you want completely minimum, right? We don't need to tell you if you're watching this and you're audio engineers. You'll know that you want minimum distortion. Now, if you follow my YouTube channel and you follow Mixphones, you'll know all about, certain things that claim to be, super linear, like the Rupert Neve headphone amp that distorts audibly after 10 milliwatts of power. And it's just, overall, it's just a massive con, right? But what's very interesting about that headphone amp is that many people, in comparison to things like topping and, other clean DAC amps, they would say, yeah, but, it's got this musicality to it and everything just sounds more musical and it's more rich and blah, 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 blah. Now, harmonic distortion can, when you're mixing, be great, because if you feel like you want to add glue, it could work as glue. If you feel like something's a bit pokey, again, you can shave off transients with distortion. You could use it to sit things further back and add depth. And in mixing, there's a lot of great things. But for monitoring, especially for me and Ed, it's something that we are very, very cautious of, and I think it's something that many people don't pay enough attention to. So if we take, for example, Ed, right, you've had a lot of speakers in your time. Now, a lot, even more, he's got even more, he's testing even more now. Now, a great example of harmonic distortion and monitoring and how you can be deceived by it would be the PSIs. Tell a few people that don't know about your experience with what you had with the low end with the PSIs.
So I think there's three elements to discuss here. One of them is the PSIs. One of them is the enjoyment and the richness of sound that harmonic distortion can give you, and also how a speaker performs after room correction, which I've measured recently, and it was quite shocking, the result, actually. With regards to the PSIs, I chose those because still to this day, I think they have the best, most expansive, sweetest sounding top end. They are the deepest sounding speaker I've ever heard, I think. And they have this rich low end, which sounds thick and full and quite warm. And it's very musical. It's punchy in its own way, but it's not transient, an under nano punchy. But the problem was, in the studio, what I was hearing was great. When I took the mixers out of the studio, the low end wasn't translating and it sounded thin, because what I was hearing as rich in the studio wasn't rich. The speakers were enhancing that. Now, I'm not saying they're bad speakers at all. I have a soft spot for them. But there was something that just wasn't working for me, mixed translation-wise. Now, if I move on to the head Type 20s that I've had for about a year now, they have this thing in the low end where there's a bit of harmonic distortion with the small woofer, the 6.5-inch woofer, I think it is, it goes down to 32 hertz. It's they sound great. And in my new studio, they've sounded really good. And they've come alive with Trinov. On their own, they sound, kind of full and quite deep. And I've measured them, and they're not the lowest distortion speakers. Certainly the Amphions are outperforming them in terms of distortion in the low end. By low end, I'm referring to below 100 hertz, and I'm talking about second and third order harmonics here, which are measurable in Ruse. But the really concerning one was when I'd corrected the heads with Trinov, and the distortion readings after that were pretty bad. The red one in Ruse, I can't remember if it's second and third order harmonics, I think, were then becoming quite audible. I remember thinking, this sounds really good. It sounds good, but is it accurate for mixing? And I think that's probably my key point in this video is, yes, if you want an audiophile experience, audiophiles want richness. They want, weight and density, but is that an honest representation of what we're mixing? And that, I think, is the key thing to investigate regarding harmonic distortion and monitoring.
Yeah, a really good example is what I've got right now. So I was telling Ed off air about the IK Multimedia. He's just got them in the studio. He's got the MTM Precision Mark IIs. I've got the Precision Mark 1s, and they sent me the Precision 5 Mark IIs. Now, what's interesting about the IK Multimedia speakers is that they've got this like bass reflex port, whatever they're doing. And what it does is it gives you the impression that you've got a lot more low end. So like on the 5s, like compared to my head type 07, the analog ones, like when it's on full on the back on the DSP, it's like, whoa, like this just nearly has as much low end than the fucking 07s. Like, man, this is impressive. But when I've test my low-end reference track, which is Wild Thoughts by like Rihanna and DJ Khaled. The reason that me and Emra choose that a lot is due to the amount of sub in it, but it's also really like punchy and it's got a lot of sub energy and it's really well mixed by Manny Mannequin. And if a headphone or a headphone amp or a speaker is not that linear in the low end, you're going to hear the low end distorting. And when you hear what clean low end should sound like on that song, it's amazing how quickly that song just jumps out to you with distortion. So with the MTM Precision Mark 5s, whilst it sounds like it's got the low end, it's harmonic distortion. It's like it's doing something, and I don't know what it's doing, if it's like adding more harmonics and whatever fundamental it's making, because on the back of the speaker it'll say, I think on the Precision 5s, it's like 47 hertz is meant to be like what it goes down to, but it can go down to 39. Also, it says that it can go down to 39 hertz. I think using like this bass reflex, whatever it's doing, right? I don't really care about the tech side of it. But what you hear is just by like putting the high pass filter on the back of the speaker to 50 hertz, all of a sudden the difference is night and day. Where I don't have the low end extension, but I've got clean low end. And because what many people don't understand is that, see, when you've got too much low end in your subs, those harmonics leak into your low mids. So what you'll find is so what you'll find is, see, trying to have a distinction between kick and bass is really difficult. So if you have, say, your kick fundamental at 80 and say like you're pushing, the bass up to maybe like, 200-ish or whatever, you know what I mean? You're letting the kick win the battle and vice versa. What you'll find is whatever instrument takes up that kind of higher octave, which is normally bass, you'll normally find that you don't get a lot of good separation. And that area seems a little bit murky and you can't really get much definition in there. And everything just kind of like mushes together. That's what a lot of headphones sound like. That's what, a lot of, say, the Neumann ND-H30s and the Sennheiser HD650s, if you give them a bass boost, it's just distorted low end and everything's mush down there and it all bleeds in. And actually you get a lot of headphones where you will boost them and they had so much harmonic distortion that the low end distortion actually creeps into the vocal, and it's like it masks like the vocal's clarity and things like that, and you get that with speakers as well. So it's very, very important that you understand first what a linear clean sound in the low end should be. And actually, like for me, if I had to mix on the Precision 5s, I need to take all that kind of lovely kind of low end feeling that would be great for producing and having a client in the room to make the speaker sound like it's got more extension. But if I was mixing on it, to get a bit of a better separation and actually hear what I'm hearing is correct low end and it's not fake low end. Because if I mixed on the Precision 5s, as Ed said about the PSIs, I would think I have ample low end when I actually don't, because it's fake bass. So I wouldn't feel the need, because if I then go adding in more sub, it might then start feeling a little bit too much. So it's very important for me that you have a blank canvas when you're mixing, which is why, especially in the low end with the Nanda Nanos, Hyphamin and Nanda Nanos, the reason we talk about them so much is because they're very, very fast and tight, but they've got very low distortion. Same with the Odyssey LCD MX4s, but and a lot of other Hyphamins and planars, a lot of planars. If you have very low distortion in the low end, you can actually hear the separation between bass and kick, which is arguably one of the most important things, like almost fundamentals of a mix engineer. If you can't distinctly tell the difference between bass and kick and get that relationship right, your translation is going to be very, 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 very varied.
Yeah, and do you know what, Paul? I don't think it's an accident that my mixes really started coming together when I moved to mixing low end on headphones.
Yeah.
And as I've discussed in videos, it doesn't matter how good the speakers are or how good the room is, just mixing on low end is so difficult to get right.
Yeah.
And I've had another interesting experience this week, and we've discussed this with regard to the present day production mum speakers, where when we've heard those, we've thought, but they're lacking in the low end, which I think we have initially thought because we're so used to all kinds of, every small speaker, every brand is cheating. They're using ports, they're using reflex ports to try and induce some harmonics in the bass to get, trying to create a phantom low end, as it were. And we're so used to hearing this now, I think, in this color and this warmth that isn't there. Whereas when you get really clean bass, it sounds a bit weird. And for us, I think initially we were like, well, there's no sustain. But the drivers are so fast. I mean, I've been testing the Mum 6s this week, and there's not, they don't extend too far, 45, I think. But you still get a big sense of low end, but they're so fast in the low end. They are revealing all sorts of issues, and particularly, as you said, if there's too much going on in the low end harmonics-wise, you can hear so clearly on the Mum 6s where anything below, say, 70 and 80 hertz is affecting above 100 hertz and masking the low mids. It's just become so apparent to me on those speakers. So they're a very, very tempting speaker for the new room, I have to say.
Yeah, and that's why, we always talk about headphones and low end, because one, obviously, you've not got, the acoustical issues, or again, trying to fight nulls and, bass decays and, trying to get that down and stuff. Where on headphones...
Losing battle.
Yeah. Again, on headphones, you don't have that issue, right? It's contained in here. Distortion is not just in the low end. It can be in the top end. But you'll normally find that due to the acoustics of sound, right? The reason that, you get more distortion in the low end is because, one, the acoustic sound always has lower energy in the low end. So your energy is always in the low end. But also to try and get drivers to produce that amount of SPL in the low end, it causes so much of a power. There's so much power. So, for example...
They have to move. Physically, the woofers, the excursion has to move way further than the top end, which can move fractions of a millimeter to produce frequencies. The low end has to move, often as much as a centimeter.
And that's why it's really important to understand... One, and especially in speakers as well, excursion, but also, the power requirements. So, for example, in headphones, the power in milliwatts, required to drive especially planar magnetic headphones can multiply just by a low end boost. So, for example, if you're adding, say, a 3 dB bass boost for Harman, you're going to require as much as double, sometimes maybe 3 times the power.
Yeah.
If you're adding 4 or 5 dB bass boost, you could sometimes need like 2 to 3 times the power that's already there just to kind of get to produce that low end at that level of SPL. It's crazy.
Isn't the statistic to produce sound an octave lower requires double the wattage, or is it quadruple?
Something like that.
I was taught this in live sound ages ago. If you want to go from 50 hertz down to 25, it requires quadruple the wattage. which is just exponentially more difficult and therefore expensive to do well.
And that's why, when you think about subwoofers, again, there's two main parts of a subwoofer. One, the actual size of the cone. Right? You actually need, not the cone, but the driver, the actual woofer itself. The driver has to be physically bigger to produce more low end. And to do that, and to power that, you need to have a much more powerful amplifier. And amplifiers, again, are really important, because if you have a shitty amplifier, even though it can provide a lot of power, a lot of wattage, if it's not very well designed, it could actually be giving you the power, but not clean power, which kind of goes into headphone amps. That's why, there's a lot of headphone amps out there that are super, super, super powerful. Like, many people will use speaker amps to power like hungry headphones, but what they don't realize is, whilst it's got like a shit ton more power than a lot of headphone amps, the THD plus N, like the harmonic distortion that it's making, is actually a lot more. So it's almost like the power is irrelevant at that point, because all you need is the correct amount of power to power whatever speaker driver that you're working with, and it needs to do that linearly with the least amount of distortion possible. So it happens everywhere. It happens with 2 ways, 3 ways, 4 ways, 6-inch, 5-inch, 7-inch, 8-inch, fucking 10-inch, 12-inch. Like, we are all at the behest of, drivers and power. And if you think about, even Amphions and passive speakers, like, that's the reason why, Amphions do cost a lot. Like, what is the Amphion amp? Is it like $2,000, Ed? Something like that?
Something like that, $2,500 for the 700, yeah.
Yeah, so if you think about, even like if you're buying like an Amphion 115, like, and what do they go down to, 50 hertz or something like that?
49, I think, plus or minus 3 dB, the Amphions.
Okay, so say 50, right, yeah. 50 hertz. You're still needing a very expensive amplifier to be able to drive those drivers linearly and cleanly. So it's something that, especially in the budget domain, especially like with like your 2-ways, your active speakers that have, the amplifiers in them, it's something you've got to be very careful about. Like, for example, Kali, like, as affordable as Kali is, they aren't the cleanest of speakers, but that's the limitation of, making a speaker on a budget. Like, you can't get, the best performing amplifiers in the world, you know what I mean? And again, it's like, you can only, there's a saying in Scotland, right, where, again, girls, put your hands over your ears, but you can only piss with the cock you've got, right? It's a very Scottish saying, right? And it's true. You can only piss with the cock you've got. And if you're a speaker manufacturer or a headphone manufacturer, and you've only got like so much of a budget to spend on, the amplifier quality, the driver quality, and other things, then you're going to be limited to the linearity that system is going to provide. So it's very, very important when you're thinking about headphones, amplifiers, and speakers, that distortion does come into it, because you can't mix what you can't hear. And if you can't hear the clarity of mixes, if you can't hear the top end of transients because the amp can't handle the SPL required, and it's just shaving off the transients, then you're not going to be able to hear your transients properly. If your low end's too coloured, then you're not going to get the separation between kick and bass. And actually, this is a funny thing that I love to tell people, that when you have a super clean system, you actually hear more distortion. Many people get like, well, it's not, but how's that possible? It's because there's no masking. So what happens is, right, if you think about distortion in, a speaker, right? So you imagine that if you look on Roo or something like that, right, and the distortion is sitting at, say, like minus 40, right, minus 40 dB. For you to have distortion that's going to be audible above that distortion, it's got to be louder than minus 40 dB. And it's the exact same way in a mix. And this is why when I made a video years ago talking about distortion, one of the main reasons that my mixes sound so punchy these days and so dynamic and so loud is because I've understood when to use distortion to my benefit and when to keep things clean. So what you'll find with a lot of mixes, and I find a lot of amateur mixes, is that when you get like over, blown with plugins, you're like this analog emulation and this analog emulation, and you put Saturn on it, and then you put in another coloured compressor on top of Saturn, and before you know it, you've got 5 plugins in a chain, and they're all distorting distortion. So it's distortion, distorting distortion, distorting distortion, distorting distortion. And what happens is, For each part of that distortion in that chain, you've got to add even more distortion to be able to make that distortion audible. Then before you know it, what you're left with is a mix that's as flat as a pancake, because it's all about contrast. So especially with your drums, if you add way too much distortion and saturation to your drums and you make them flat as a pancake, you're going to have to make everything else as flat as a pancake, because then your drums aren't going to sound as punchy enough. And that's why when you mix clean and you can hear your low end, what happens is it's a perfect storm, because you're like, right, okay, I only need to add that amount of saturation. A very good example of that. And what was it, Ed? I can't remember what it was that changed. I think it was the Neumanns. It was the Neumanns, wasn't it? Because I think you were talking about, was it the Wes Audio Rhea or something like that? You were on about the THD percentages. And you were like, on the Neumanns, it was like,
just about here 3%, which is the high setting. It's 2.5 or 3% depending on which module you have, and the medium setting I think is 1 or 1.5% depending on which module you have. And on the Neumanns, because they're quite distorted above 5K, those speakers, despite people contesting that online. If you measure it, it's there. I couldn't really hear it. Now my ears did tune into this more as well after, but on the Neumanns, I was engaging the high THD and be like, yeah, it's there. And then as soon as I got something else, particularly the PSIs, it was like, whoa, this is lethal. And then I've never put more than the medium on a mix since then.
Yeah, and that's why when I use distortion, I use it in a very fast way. I don't do it in a sustained way. So that's why I use clipping. That's a lot. And that's why we can get mixes so loud. So we can use the benefits of clipping, which is to shave off transients, but to only kind of shave off the fastest transients that will impact our limiters. Limiters are all about timing, right? So if you think about, you've got a limiter on your tubas, and again, you just do like that, like bap, 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 bap. When you've got a mix, the last thing you want is one part of a mix, or a snare hit, or a kick hit, or a tom hit that makes the limiter react too much, and you hear that dip. Because when you think about it, when you hear limiters, especially shitty limiters, like if you think about back in the day, like Waves L1 and stuff like that, you can hear these limiters pumping. You can hear when a big transient comes in and all of a sudden the whole mix just goes and just dips down. And it's so funny when I hear some choruses and some naughties mixes, because they're so overly limited with technology that they didn't really have at the time. You know what I mean? I would think about it in the naughties. It was basically L1 and people were just kind of experimenting with like brick wall limiters and stuff. And you could hear choruses just go whoop, and like there's no dynamics. If you listen to the Oasis records, right, especially when Spotify came out with normalization, like again they're remastered now, but see if you listen to the originals on Spotify, the ones that weren't remastered, see when Oasis hits in a chorus, it doesn't do anything. It just kind of goes like that. It's meant to go like that, but it just kind of goes just a little bit up. And they just sound really flat. They sound like flat as a pancake compared to like modern mixes when you've got like them normalized. So it's very important that whilst, harmonic distortion is something that is used, by us and professionals every, day of the week, it's important to understand that it's all about being selective and it's all about only using as much as you need. Especially if you consider that many people talk about tracking, because I know the amount of people that are screaming at me right now going, what about tracking? What about tracking? What about Neves? What about consoles? And what about APIs and op amps and, color distresses and blah, 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 blah. Yes, I know. Again,
if you know what you're doing with engineering and you know what you're doing with harmonic distortion in the low end when you're engineering, crack on. Work away if you've got a vision for your sound.
The Working Audio Tools podcast is brought to you in association with our friends at DistroKid for all of your musical distribution needs. Don't forget, you can't just upload your songs to Amazon, Spotify, iTunes, or Tidal. You have to go through a music distribution service. There are many out there, but DistroKid is the one that Paul and myself use. They don't take any of your royalties. You keep 100% of the streaming revenue that you earn. For just $1.92 a month or $22.99 a year, you can upload unlimited songs. Your lyrics can be found in Google and other places. You get the blue Spotify verified checkmark, and you can create royalty splits between yourselves and fellow contributors. You also get access to the new DistroKid iPhone app for editing and uploading songs and accessing your statistics on the move. There are plenty of other tools available on DistroKid. We'll go through those in another section.
And as Ed said very correctly, it's about being engineers, understanding what you're working with and what is too much. So for example, my acoustic guitar chain that I've got fixed now, because I've been working with sessions all last week, and we were having to lay down a lot of guitars, and I want my guitars to be almost like I can just kind of mix them like that. I don't really want to do too much work to them. For me, on especially acoustic guitars, there's a lot of what I call top-end fizzle. It's just like shite up there. And stuff that like I want to take out on the way in. And a way of doing that is by kind of colouring the sound on the way in. Because sometimes, certain things can sound sterile, and many people will be like Audient preamps and, Focusrite preamps and, really clean RME preamps. Like they're sterile. They're really sterile. Yeah, sometimes you need a sterile recording. Like for me, when I record on the way in, I don't go with the 1073, because what happens with the 1073s that I've got, and it happens with all 1073s, is that you need to ride the gain manually, because if the singer belts at a certain point, if it's a kind of a dynamic track, and I've had it in a session where the vocalist had the verse, kind of set in a certain way, then she just went to a bridge where she just went and belted her voice. But
that's with any preamp. That's basic gain staging for recording at different levels, isn't it? I mean, like I would record on one channel, bridges on another, and choruses on another, just for 3 different gain stages. That's how I've always done it.
Right, okay, because obviously what I was having to do was, in that, I was like, oh, right, okay, I didn't expect that to jump, because what happened was it then jumped up to a different part of the gain stage, and it was actually distorting the 1073. So where I had it in a really nice gain stage, when she hit it, I was like, oh, wow, okay. And obviously you've got to be careful when you're using, mic preamps, especially having them low, because if you have them too low, then you've got a signal to noise ratio, and what you're trying to do is get the hottest signal that you can, so you can bring the noise down. So you're always wanting to have the preamp, as kind of hot as you can. But with that track, it was like, she just hit it, and I was like, oh, that just ruined that take. I can't have that. So we'll have to redo it. And then I was like, oh my God, like I'm going to, if we have to do like another take, I'm going to have to ride it manually. And then funnily enough, like 2 days later, must have been someone on the algorithm came up with 1073. And I think it was Chris Brown's engineer, and he was talking about that's what he has to do. So he's got a 1073 going into a TubeTech CL1B. There's like on Chris Brown's vocal, he's like, on this part of the voice, on this part of the track, I've got to bring it up, and then I've got to bring it down. And I'm like, why are we doing that on like modern day records?
But it depends how the artist wants to work, ultimately. I've always done that because that's how I've worked. And a lot of singers I've worked with are happy to do that. But if you want someone who's just going to go from start to finish, you have to manually ride the gain pots. And then it affects compression downstream. So you're getting into a bit of a can of worms there. So for me, it's just easier just to have 2 or 3 different sections.
But then that's quite interesting for me, because again, I've never really thought about that. Because at the end of the day, I'm like, that's like, I'm like, I want to do a full take. Okay, but actually do verse and chorus. Like when I'm doing loads of vocal sessions, sometimes we've been doing it line by line. Like I didn't really realise how many people have to go line by line to get like vocal performances right. But for me, like I found that my vocal chain is an ID48 mic pre, really loads of headroom going into the Fairchild. That's what I'm recording through right now. So my voiceover goes through this, and like all my vocals for the sessions have been going through it. And what I found is that with the ID48, if they go through a really loud bit, I'm not getting any more distortion. It's really pushing into the grandchild, which is like a 500 series Fairchild. And I've got it in a really slow setting, like a slowest setting, and it just manages the peaks so well. Like I would have that over a fucking CL1B any day of the week, because I like the distortion that it adds in going in. So it has got a colour to it. It's got the tubes, and many people will be like, oh yeah, the tube sound. Again, I'm not an audiophile, or again, I'm not one of those kind of massive gearheads. There is a sound to it, but again, it's actually more kind of intermodulation distortion. If you go into plugin doctor and stuff, the THD is lower than you think, but it has got quite a lot of intermodulation distortion. But it's a sound, and I find that it kind of adds a thickness to vocals, and sometimes it could kind of take the sterile nature of the clean preamp, and it just levels the vocal perfectly, where I'm not getting that audible distortion that I get from the 1073 when I'm having to like I can manually ride it, which I hate. I just don't like that. And it's just really simple for me. I can just get takes done in one setup, and I don't need to have different setups for a verse or a fucking chorus and a fucking bridge. I can generally just have, you know, the headroom of the ID48 going into the grandchild, which again has a lot of headroom, and I can push it, and I'm not getting what I class as bad distortion, like the clipping or the distortion that was happening through the 1073 wasn't good distortion. It was like out of character.
They're kind of prone for that. Like the LB ones I have now. There's a theory that, you know, the 500 series ones aren't as good because they're not as powered because of the rails they're on. Which debatable. I don't know. Fight that one out in the comments. Can't give a shit. But there is a point on all knees, in my experience, where if you hit them too hard, there's no warning. They just start having this really nasty clipping sound. And if you're not careful as well, you might be getting converter clipping as well, which is very audibly horrible. So yeah, you got to be careful with that. But that's getting into the realm of engineering. But ultimately what you're getting at is you need good monitoring to be able to hear this. And you need low distortion monitoring to be able to hear when there is distortion in your recording signal. So back to the, and you refer to people who might be complaining about recording and needing distortion. You've got to hear it as well, because if you're not hearing it and you're thinking, I want more distortion on this part, and then you go to some speakers where you can hear it and then you've blown it out and you've missed the session now. You can't go back and undo
Correct.
it. So you have to get it right at source.
The Working Audio Tools podcast is brought to you in association with our friends at DistroKid for all of your musical distribution needs. For a little bit more, $39.99 a month, you can have 2 artists on your roster, which includes everything just mentioned. Additionally, synced lyrics in Apple Music, further streaming analytics statistics. You can create a customizable record name. Mine, for example, is Ed Thorne Rhythm and Records. And you can customize release dates, pre-order dates, iTunes pricing, and again, much more. Now, if you're an artist manager or a record label, the Ultimate Bundle gives you up to 100 artists for just $89.99 a year. And you get 1 terabyte of instant file sharing, which is useful, but also contact information for thousands of playlist curators on Spotify. This is really useful so you can pitch your artist music to playlist curators around the world, only available in the Ultimate Bundle from DistroKid.
So, in your experience, in terms of, let's do speakers, headphones, and headphone amps, I think we know where we're going to go with this. What are the best speakers you've heard for clean audio and clean low end?
Alcons are just the cleanest I've ever heard, man. Alcons are just crazy low distortion. In terms of headphone amps and DACs, my topping discrete stack is super clean to the point where it's super boring. It's something that I find funny, is that many people like distortion because sometimes, even though like you can't really hear distortion that well, it kind of, I don't know, it seems a bit overly coloured sometimes. And sometimes the distortion can kind of hype you. That's why some people, again, add, distortion with Spectre on a vocal to kind of hype certain things. Again, you'll add distortion to hype things and add energy. But in your monitoring, like especially in some like headphone amps and stuff, it can make things sound a bit overly hyped. So not only you get shaving off your transients, but it can also make things sound a little bit hyped as well. But that thing is just like super boring. Like audiophiles hate it.
I heard that stack and the Dan Clark Stealths at Can Jam. That is endgame headphone setup. Probably, I can't imagine that getting improved in the next decade.
Well, what you actually heard was the A900. So I've got the A90 discrete. And what you heard is what I'm going to get sent in a couple of weeks' time, which is that A900. So headphone-wise, it's arguably one of the most powerful headphone amps. It's offering a crazy eye-watering 22 watts, 16 ohm. 22 watts at 16 ohm, yeah. At 16 ohm. That's current beyond current. That's like so much current. It's the opposite of current limited. And 32 ohms, I think it's 14 watts. I think it's 14 watts I think it's 14 watts at 32 ohms and 22 watts at 16 ohm. And honestly, the signal to noise ratio, the dynamic range of that A900 that you heard, I think is around 153 dB dynamic range.
Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So right, we're there now. We're in the realm of unnecessary. But it once you've heard that kind of stuff, you're listening to it and you're literally thinking, I don't even know what I'm listening out for here. There's just nothing. There's not a problem in that setup at all. It's ridiculous. Yeah, topping are on it. Your review of the DX5 Mark II was very good.
Yeah.
Enjoyed that. I look forward to getting mine because that will basically, for as you said in the video, for most studios, that'll be endgame headphone DAC amp.
Correct.
Well, not endgame. I remember you pulled each other up on the word endgame, but it's unlikely people are going to need anything else.
Nope.
In terms of headphones, are we still talking nanos for the cleanest low end?
No, I would say it's arguable, but I'd say the MX4s. I'd say they probably have, but I think it's because the MX4s have, the Odyssey MX4s have this kind of lower sub-octave to them almost. And it's like they do sound like they go a little bit deeper to me. And it's like having a subwoofer on your head. But it's clean. Like I could listen to Wild Thoughts and I could fucking give it like 5-6 dB in the low end. And it's just not giving up. It's just like, give me more. I'd say the MX4s, Nanos and MX4s, but it's because they do two different jobs. Nanos are kind of like your mum sixes. It's like Nanos are basically like a sealed cabinet for headphones. And the Odyssey MX4s are, and again the LCDX as well, they are kind of like, a big ported sub. It's kind of like PMC, low end, transmission line, low end. But speaker wise, that's where it gets a lot more difficult because like in headphones, you can get planar headphones that have like super low distortion. They're good at EQ handling as well, so you can give them a lot of bass that's needed to get the tonal accuracy right for a translation. But speakers are a hard one. That's why I always say to people that I can't really recommend a speaker under £1,000 for mixing and mastering. I really can't. And it sounds really entitled and stuff, but I'm just being honest that, when it comes to speakers, the amount of power that's required to produce the low end, to produce the speed and the transients, it's like there's so much power required and there's so much excursion going on and there's so much work and heavy lifting that a speaker has to do that a lot of the times you genuinely, it is reflected in the price. And if you listen to Ed's Amphions with his, his Amphion amp, if you even listen to, even like Head are getting a little bit crazy. Like I've not heard my Type 07 A-cores next to like, a more expensive speaker like, Dutch and Dutch or Keys or even, the Amphions and stuff with amps. But from what I've heard so far, like the bass separation of these heads is remarkable, which is funny because they've got the same 7-inch woofer as you have in the Type 20s. Ed's Type 20s are a 3-way, these are 2-ways. When you're using the Type 20s, are you using the ported or are you using the inserts to make them sealed?
I am using the plugs to seal them. Okay. And I need to test them without the plugs, although I don't understand how that would reduce the harmonic distortion. I've been told to test it. But I've stuffed the plugs in so far, I'm slightly concerned I'm not going to get them out.
Yeah, because I did see something, I think it was on Audio Science Review, and from what I'm pretty sure was measured, the closed system of the heads was actually producing more low-end distortion.
That's what I've been told, yeah, that exact review, yeah. Which is mad, because they plugging them effectively makes them a sealed enclosure.
I know.
But they've been designed to be a ported enclosure. So with the seal, it's altering the characteristics and the performance of the speaker away from what it's been designed for. So it doesn't surprise me that there's probably more distortion with that with the plugs in. But if it's a ported enclosure, there's going to be enough turbulent air coming out of the speaker anyway, creating enough distortion as it is. It's another thing I need to test on my speaker journey, but I've got to say again, the Mum 6s in terms of speed and cleanliness and the lengths of reverbs and decays and things I'm hearing, and the separation is just unreal. And the fact that I can play around with Spectre below 100 hertz and hear what's happening at 160, 200 hertz is just ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think that's why, in the end, if you really, really do want low end don't fake it. Get a subwoofer. I know subwoofers aren't for everybody, and again, they don't work in every room, as Ed's found, to his detriment of his room so far.
Twice.
Yeah.
But I need two. I think that's my issue. Because
I agree.
I'm seeing evidence of how two. Well, let's not go into that. But yeah. That's
because
not an option
if you go in my Atmos room, like I remember, like Ed gave me a whoo when he was in my Atmos room and I played Boom. He was like, Jesus Christ, you fucking nailed the low end in this room. So, but what happens is that I get the low end, but because again the WS 6.2 has a bigger amp in it, and again it's got two woofers on it, and it's like it just can handle the headroom. It's taking the power requirements from the top speakers and putting it onto the sub, and that's why you even think about it from a three-way point of view, that could sometimes be a benefit. If you've got a tweeter, a mid driver, and a woofer, the less that you can get the woofer to do, that in theory, depending on the design of the headphones and the quality of the driver, it should bring down the distortion and a lot of speakers going for a three-way or a four-way. But again, even like the bigger the driver, that's what Emra says to me all the time. His eaves are that big. He's got the 12-inch eaves, and they're that big. It was a double-man lift. He's like, Paul, you can't lift them on their own. If you can, you need to have a good back. But I was a two-man lift for him, and he's like, Paul, he went, the only way to get proper low end is to have a bigger woofer. You need to have a bigger driver.
Yeah,
Paul.
but the problem is then you get into the compromise of the bigger the driver, the slower it is to slow down and stop, and the harder it is to control slew rates. And
that's why a lot of subwoofers are the price that they're at, and that's why, and that's something that I think that the reason why I wanted to make this was because distortion is unavoidable, right? And audio is unavoidable, but by managing distortion and understanding it and understanding how it impacts your monitoring, how it impacts your mixing, how it impacts what you hear. As soon as you have an understanding, I'm not saying that you need to understand the absolute nuances of distortion, down to like proper scientific stuff, right? You don't need to fucking rabbit hole it. At the end of the day, we're mixing and mastering engineers, and we use our ears. And if our ears aren't telling us the truth, and we can't make heads or tails what's going on, between we're kick and we're bass, and we've got distortion that's, leading up into our vocals and stuff. If we cannot make correct decisions, then that's going to impact our translation. And the whole point of this podcast is that we're trying to share the journey. Now, we are very, very aware that, again, Dunning-Kruger is always looming over our heads, and if Dunning-Kruger was a person, he's always right at my shoulder whispering at me going, just remember, you don't know everything. You only know a certain part of this. It goes deeper, but come with me, I'll take you down a rabbit hole. But
he's called MSM.
I know.
He's regularly on the end of a phone saying, bruv, I know nothing about this, therefore you know fuck all about this. And I'm like, yes, sensei.
Correct. But again, that's important to understand, right? It's important to understand that you only need to know what you need to know. And what you need to know is that right now, distortion can be impacting your mixing and could be the reason why your mix translation isn't the way
what if you don't
want
know
it to
what
be.
You need to know? That's where we come in, because we regularly find things that we don't know that we need to know, and we tell you guys about it. And we might sound like fools, but we are learning all the way.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, to end kind of the episode, like, distortion isn't something to be scared of. It's something that you just need to learn how to manage. That's all it is. Distortion is all management. If you speak to headphone designers, amplifier designers, speaker manufacturers, what they will tell you is that we're just constantly in a fight against distortion. Like, distortion is the thing they're constantly fighting against. And I hope this is going to be the episode that triggers some of you to look at your monitoring and ask yourself, am I hearing linear? Do I even understand what is close to linear? Because I suppose proper linear is... No, I suppose if you listen to like Hyphamans and Odyssey MX4s through like my topping, that is probably as linear as you're going to get, because you're talking like minus 120, minus 130 dB THD plus N. And it's important to understand as well that as much as, the topping A900 and my topping discrete stuff and all the topping stuff has like crazy, distortion levels of, past, way past, minus 120 dB. A lot of the times you only need to be roughly maybe around, maybe below minus 100. Like normally if distortion and noise is below minus 100, normally you'll be fine. It'll be linear enough, and sometimes being linear enough is enough, and because you can overcomplicate a lot of these things. But hopefully some of you will maybe dive a little bit deeper into it. Maybe you'll think twice when you're adding in that distortion plugin, or even the next time you're in the chain in a mix, just sit there and go, how much distortion am I adding in this chain here? That's distorting that, and I need more distortion so I can hear the distortion above that. And do I actually need that distortion? Yeah. Because a lot of the times I mix clean as a whistle a lot, to the point where when I use distortion, I hear it, and it could be an effect. But if I want to sit, like again, I was doing a mix today, and there was a backing vocal that was just a bit too sterile. It was too clean, too sterile. And because again, I've got the system to be able to hear it, I was like, right, okay, this is too sterile. Let's maybe poking out a little bit. What did I do? I distorted it. I just used a random distortion plugin. Yes, it had aliasing in it, and that's another thing that we won't get into. But again, the aliasing, again,
aliasing and Atmos, Paul, banned on this channel.
Smooth. What did it do? The aliasing saturator, it smoothed everything out. It sat that vocal back, and it took the sterile nature of the vocal and sat it back. So it sat it back behind the vocal. I wasn't really hearing it as much. It wasn't something that compression could really fix. It was something that I needed to shave off the transient peaks of it. I needed to genuinely shave it off and flatten it and make it sit back. And so there are times when definitely distortion is the way. I mean, at the end of the day, my vocal chain has got distortion via the grandchild. My acoustic guitars are going through distortion. I'm abusing distortion. But a lot of the times what's important to understand is that a lot of tracking engineers are using saturation because they understand the benefits of distortion. And then by you distorting that in your mixing stage, you're giving it, in most cases, you're giving it unnecessary saturation, which is why if you look at mix with the masters, you'll notice that a lot of them are just using clean, linear SSL fucking channel strips or Pro Q3, because that's all they need is just some EQ moves. Yeah, they might use a fucking one compressor, but they're very, very careful.
And you can get distortion out of those. The SSL compressors can distort quite nicely, quite quickly as well.
Yeah, but it depends how you hit it. If you abuse like the input lines and the modeled the line-ins and stuff, you get a wee bit of saturation. But yeah, most mixers are mixing very clean, because at the end of the day, that's the only way that you can actually hear the saturation that you need to add. Saturation and distortion, and by the way, saturation and distortion is the same thing. It really frustrates me when people do that, because I think it's like distortion's got a bad term to it, but saturation's like, saturation's good and distortion's bad. Yeah, they're the same fucking thing.
Distortion's a negative thing, saturation's an enhancement, isn't it?
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, how it's perceived. For those of you wondering why Paul says sterile with a Y-L at the end, he means sterile, but the accent means he can't say it properly. So sterile.
In Scotland, it's sterile. It's sterile in Scotland.
So good luck to YouTube captions translating that.
Your accent's fucking sterile, right? Fuck you, right? Go fuck off. Fuck you. Fucking sterile this, you prick.
Fuck, about time. Well, I was going to suggest that we need to teach people how to measure distortion in their system, which would be to go into Room EQ Wizard, and you can measure distortion, and it's definitely worth measuring after any room correction, because the results will probably be quite shocking and may influence what speakers you decide to get in your room. Anyway, on that harmonic bombshell, thanks to DistroKid for sponsoring the episode. Check out Nicholas's email list link in the description below. There's a wealth of amazing information on that. It's been the Working Audio Tools. I'm Ed Thorne. He's Mr. Nobody now. Mr. Paul Third, Mr. Bobhead. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.